Indie Game Garden.
Francisco González has been making adventure games since 2001. His Ben Jordan Paranormal Investigator series became a cult hit on adventure game studio forums and beyond. And once he finished the series in 2012, he decided to make games professionally. His first game, A Golden Wake, was published in 2014 by Wadjet Eye Games. He released his second game, Shardlight, in 2016. In 2018, he released Lamplight City, published by Application Systems Heidelberg, and his most recent release, Rosewater, is a thrilling Western tale set in the world of Lamplight City. It includes strange technologies alongside classic Western tropes, while simultaneously stretching said tropes to new heights in a type of neo-Western that could only have come from Francisco's brain. It's such a great example of what an adventure game can be, made by one of the foremost champions of adventure game studio and the adventure game community at large. It's such an honor to have Francisco on the show today to talk about his life and his work. So without further ado, let's get to it. Well, Francisco, hi. It's such an honor to have you on Indie Game Garden. I've been a fan of your work for just a little bit now. I actually found Rosewater just like perusing Steam and looking for Western stories that I've been interested in. And then as I kind of have gotten very recently into Adventure Game Studio, I realized just how much of a early adopter and influential person in the genre that you have been. So it's been cool to kind of almost learn backwards in that way. But I would love to hear more about your journey with games. I know it might be a longer story considering that you started working with AGS 25 years ago. But if we spent the entire episode just talking about origins and past work, I would consider it a success. So tell us the tale.
Well, so first of all, hello. Thank you for having me on. I'm very pleased to hear that you found Rosewater just searching for Westerns on Steam, because that means that the algorithm, I guess, did its job, which is reassuring. Yeah, and I don't know how to feel hearing you say that. That's very kind. But yeah, so when you ask about my journey with games, you mean as a developer or as a player or both? Or
yeah, I kind of start out with this question, and it is broad. So some folks are like, it's overwhelming, or some folks are like, I can't. But I'm interested, in kind of first just how you got into games, like what were the games you were playing maybe growing up, or that fascinated you, and then specifically the point of like, when did it go from this is something I'm interested in doing, in my free time, like playing games, into like, I want to make them, and then maybe the pivot point that happened for you, where after you finished the Ben Jordan series, going from like more of a hobbyist into taking the leap and going commercial. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll try and keep this as brief as possible.
No, please don't.
Well, I mean, I feel like I answer some questions very similarly on interviews I do, so I always try and mix it up a little bit, and I'll give you a little extra information with this one, because I realize that there's a bit of information that I've never talked about on a podcast before, so I'll give you some exclusive information.
Honored.
In that
Thank you.
In that request. Okay, so my story with games basically starts off. I was born in 1982, so I was born right when video games were crashing, apparently. I remember as a kid I had an Atari 2600, and I remember watching my dad play Pitfall and Omega Race and other Atari games, including one where you could code essentially in BASIC to get like an image. Unfortunately, our house was broken into and the Atari was stolen, so I didn't have it for very long. But after that, I wanted a Nintendo. I got a Sega Master System instead, because I guess they were out of Nintendos. But I still enjoyed playing the Sega Master System games. So as a child, I was pretty much a console gamer. And then I got a subscription to Nintendo Power Magazine, which at the time had an offer. I should also point out that I had also gotten an NES at this time. I didn't just get a subscription to Nintendo Power Magazine without one. And they were running a promotion at that time where if you got a subscription to Nintendo Power, they would send you a free copy of Dragon Warrior. And so I got that free copy of Dragon Warrior and I was playing it. I had never played a JRPG before, but I remember reading the manual and really getting excited at the prospect of the questing and the like interacting with characters and things like that. And I played it, and I mean, I was about 8 or 9 years old at the time, and so it wasn't a super difficult game, but it's I guess I don't know. I wasn't really into the grinding and the combat part. I remember thinking, "Oh my god, I just leveled up, and now I have to get how many experience points before I go to the next level." But I really liked the going around to the towns and talking to the characters and stuff, and that kind of planted the seed in my brain of what would later become my appreciation and love for point and click adventure games, because that's kind of the foundational structure of those. Um, and then I found King's Quest V on NES. I rented it and I played it, and that I really fell in love with that, even though it's a horrible, horrible port and it's really hard to control. Somehow, I beat it without like looking up a walkthrough or anything.
Wow.
Because yeah, as obtuse and ridiculous as some of those puzzles are in the PC version, there was even less feedback in the NES version. So I
Right.
have no idea. I feel like when we're kids, we have this infinite patience that we lose when we get into adulthood, and that's my only explanation for how I was able to finish that game. Anyway, yeah. So when I was in about fourth grade or so, I think by that time we had already gotten a home computer, and I had already gotten a few games like King's Quest IV and Hugo's House of Horrors and a bunch of shareware games and things like that. I had a whole bunch. I was playing like Commander Keen, so I had a whole bunch of different genres of games. I also remember going to a friend of my mom's house. We were all going to the beach, and like before we went, my mom's friend's husband had a Mac, and I remember him
Mm.
showing me Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade on Mac. It was in black and white, and I remember that like he was going around the castle, and he was like, "Oh yeah, there's this fun part, and you have to like talk your way out of the fights with the guards, and then there's this one guy that and he described the puzzle where you have to get the like increasingly large amounts of beer for the one guard."
Mm.
And I thought, wow, this is really cool. So that was another like tick of the box of liking adventure games. But I remember, yeah, like at that point when I was in fourth grade, we upgraded our PC from a 286 to a 486, and we got a sound card. And I remember loading up King's Quest IV, having previously played it with just like the beeps and boops of the PC speaker, and hearing this amazing music coming out of the sound card. And it was just like a regular ad-lib sound card. It wasn't even one of those super fancy MT32 ones. And I was blown away, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing!" So yeah, I mean, from then on, I basically played all of the classic catalog of the Sierra and LucasArts point and clicks. I remember getting a single speed external CD-ROM drive, and it came with a bundle of games, one of which was Loom, and that was really cool. And then I remember going and getting The Secret of Monkey Island on CD-ROM, and like the music was, you could listen to it if you put it into your stereo, as long as you didn't play track one, because that would make a horrible noise that would destroy your speakers. But yeah, that was really cool, and that's kind of what set my imagination going. And from that point, I thought, wow, this would be really cool to make one of these games. I remember designing like on paper just really stupid rudimentary like quests after having played the King's Quest games. And nobody I knew played adventure games, and I had nobody aside from my family to be like, look at this. And so that didn't really go anywhere. But I pivoted more into wanting to make them at about that time, and I had a subscription to a magazine called 321 Contact magazine, which, if anyone is old enough like me to remember there was a PBS show called 321 Contact that was just like general like science and tech and just stuff that was cool for kids. And 321 Contact magazine in the back usually had a little like programming instruction guide. And I remember one issue had a guide on how to program a text adventure in BASIC. And it was just like escape the haunted house. And I tried doing it and it was cool. But then after I finished, I realized that in the process of coding it, I knew all of the messages and stuff. So I couldn't really play it because I already knew what happened.
Right.
And I didn't have anybody, who could play it. So I was just like, well, I did that, but whatever. And then it wasn't until a few years later when I was in high school that a friend of mine gave me a copy of Click and Play. And at that time I was already on America Online, and there was like a section there where you could download games that people had made with Click and Play. And some people had tried making more or less as close as you could make a point and click adventure in Click and Play. And so I thought, oh, let me try doing that. So I did. I did the usual thing that most people do, and I made a Monkey Island fan game. I ripped sprites, and I just made a really stupid little Monkey Island fan game. And then I was like, okay, let me try making more stuff with this. And so I made a few games in Click and Play. And now this is the part that I've never talked about publicly before. So I got the idea to make a game called Scott's Adventures, which was about a high school student named Scott Pulowski, I think. I don't even remember. But it was a pretty generic story. It was actually pretty influenced by Grim Fandango in the sense that it was like a multi-year story. And it started off with this kid in high school, and he discovers a conspiracy, like the mafia takes over his high school, and then he has to go into hiding, and then he has to come back and defeat the mafia. Wow. And it was really stupid, and very overambitious. But I was experimenting with drawing the backgrounds on paper and scanning them and doing all the animations because I was really inspired by the Curse of Monkey Island to do that. So this pretty much places it at the end of the 90s. I had Click and Play was actually really interesting because it had this kind of rudimentary animation preview system, which is very similar to what Adventure Game Studio has, where if you import the individual files, it creates like a framed, like a reel of frames that you can then see. So Click and Play was actually really good as a tool to like preview my animations, especially since I was doing them on paper. So I could see that like they looked fluid before I bothered coloring them in. Like I could put them in just the scan. I could just put the scan, import the scans. And then once I saw that worked, I was like, oh, okay, I can color these in. But anyway, I spent a fair amount of time working on the game. I even composed like MIDI tracks because I had a MIDI keyboard at the time. So I kind of dipped my toe into doing music with those. And I did a few backgrounds with like watercolors, and those look terrible, but whatever. I had a scanner, so I was really excited to do that. And I built a few scenes in Click and Play because at the time I had found that there were people that were working on an engine called Scram, that's SCRAMM, which was kind of supposed to be a Scum-like. But unfortunately, that never really materialized. I was just talking about it over this past weekend because I was at a conference called Narroscope where I actually encountered a friend of mine who I've known since those days because we met like via the forums of Scram.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, they never really offered any kind of concrete proof that they were working on anything. They would just kind of post and be like, yeah, we made really good progress in this, but there were never any demo games. There were never even any screenshots or anything. So I have no idea what that project ever actually was. But anyway, this would have been like 1999 or so. Because then I was thinking, okay, well, Click and Play isn't good for this, but Scram will be great. So I'll make Scott's Adventures in Scram. So years later, I found Adventure Game Studio. I was in college in like late 2000, and I was Googling Adventure Game Maker. I found Adventure Game Studio. At this point, I had kind of abandoned the idea of making Scott's Adventures because I had gotten bored of it or moved on or whatever. And yeah, I found AGS, and the most important thing about AGS, aside from the fact that there was actually something to download and play around with, was the fact that there was already games that had been finished with it. So I
Hmm.
knew that it was like a fully functional engine to be able to finish a game, and that was very important. So yeah, I downloaded it, I messed around with it, I joined a community called Reality on the Norm, which was a group of people that just made. It was set in this village called Reality on the Norm, and it was very quirky British humor kind of communal project because you could make games, and then you were encouraged to upload your graphics, your backgrounds, and your characters so other people could use them. It was drawn in a very simple style, so you didn't have to have much artistic talent to create your own assets and match the style. So I made a game in like a week called The Lost Treasure of Reality on the Norm. Sorry, New York City traffic.
No
Um,
worries.
and it was about a pirate named Hooky McPegleg who comes to reality on the Norm, and then he, at the end, he instead of finding the treasure, he gets appointed mayor. And then I made a second game where or sorry, not mayor, the mayor, who's a zombie, appoints him postman
Of
because
course.
there was another game where the postman had been murdered. So it was kind of piggybacking off of that. So anyway, the second game was called Hooky McPegleg Pirate Postman, and you're the postman, but you're a pirate, so you're illiterate. So first you have to learn how to read in order to deliver the mail, and then once you do that, you have to like solve a mystery. And then I made a third game called The Chef about an Italian chef and his nudist brother, who uncovers a conspiracy that's because someone's trying to get his restaurant shut down. And then so that was fun. So I made those three games, and then I was like, okay, this is fun, but I kind of want to expand and do something else. So I had a couple of false starts. I wanted to make. I kind of went back to the Scott's Adventure as well, as far as doing the graphics, drawing the backgrounds on paper, and doing the character animations. I was going to make a game called Granny Zombie Killer about an elderly lady who is a retired zombie killer, and her grandson gets kidnapped by zombies one night, and she has to bring out the old chainsaw and go out and kill some zombies. But
That sounds fun.
yeah, it never really made it very far. I made a demo for it, which was only a few rooms, but I was really proud of myself because I had gotten a copy of Richard Williams's animation animator's survival kit, which I still have to this day.
Hmm.
And I had read it, and I had studied how to make smoother animations, and I was really proud of her walk cycle. I'm sure if I saw it now, I would think it was horrible, but at the time, I was like, "Wow, this is amazing! I can animate walk cycles." Um, and so I made a demo, and then I also did a game called Granny Zombie Killer in Mittens Murder Mystery for the monthly Adventure Game Studio competition, because at the time the first Mittens was happening, which Mittens was the name of the yearly gathering of the AGS community that had started in 2002. And so I was like, oh well, I can't go, and since I'm feeling FOMO, I'm going to make this game about this character talking to all of the people at Mittens, and I got most of the people to voice themselves. It was pretty funny.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So once I did that, and I realized that Granny Zombie Killer was kind of a little too much for me asset wise, I decided to stick to pixel art, and I was going to make a game about a guy who travels the world looking for the lost AGS source code, and he was going to go and visit all of the AGS members. So you see, this is still very thematically similar, kind of, to Mittens Murder Mystery.
Right.
Um, but then I was like, I'm having all these ideas, but they're too in jokey. I want to do something more people will appreciate, and that's when I got the idea to make Ben Jordan Paranormal Investigator. I still kept the idea of the whole world travel thing,
Yeah.
but I wanted to make something. I was really obviously influenced by Gabriel Knight, and so I wanted to do something involving the supernatural or the paranormal. I wanted to do something that had to do with traveling the world, and I wanted to do it so that it was episodic, even though episodic gaming wasn't really a thing at the time.
Hmm.
I knew that I could make if I made each game a separate case, I could make a series, and I wouldn't have to spend too much time on one particular game. So yeah, that's kind of what where the Ben Jordan series came from. I spent from 2004 to 2012 working on those, and then I had the enormous fortune to be offered the opportunity to publish a game, and so I came up with the idea for Golden Wake. That came out in 2014, and then I was also incredibly lucky to be able to continue doing it. So I released three more games after that: Shardlight, Lamplight City, and Rosewater, and now here we are. So that's it in a nutshell. Thanks for having me on your podcast. Bye. No, I'm kidding. Let's keep going, please. You say something. I'm tired of talking now.
No, that's really fascinating to hear, and I really do mean it. We could just keep talking about that and have that be the podcast. But one of the things that's remarkable to me is even when games were, very rudimentary compared to what we think of them today, as far as like the genres they can span, like folks were still inspired in so many different genres with like using the same tools like click and play, like you mentioned, because one of the things I always come back to when I hear about click and play is Derek Yu and how he was like the developer of behind Spelunky and UFO 50, and how he was an early click and play member and talks about how that was kind of his launching point.
That makes a lot of sense.
and it's like, it's fascinating to hear how, two designers who are making completely different kinds of games, in you and Derek Yu, are coming from, using the same software. And I just think that as far as like technological beginnings and origins, that's always interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I know at least one other adventure game design. Well, I'd call him an adventure game designer. He made at least one, who also used click and play. It was Jay Tholen, who made Dropsy and Hypnospace Outlaw.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, one thing I sound like a broken record with on this podcast sometimes is how weird it is that all of these things are like included under one banner of video games, because like they each have a different language as far as like adventure games versus arcadey games versus, shooters or whatever. It's fascinating that they're all thought of as, especially by folks who maybe aren't, quote unquote gamers, as like the same thing, when in reality, the interests that bring folks, designers especially, to them can be so different and broad. And that kind of brings me to my next question regarding Rosewater in particular, but just in general, as far as like your games are obviously mainly surrounding the solving of puzzles and the advancement of story through these different environments and worlds that you create. And I was wondering, like, the writing in your games really shines.
Thank you.
And yeah, of course, for that reason, I'm interested in kind of like your influences. Could be games, could be literature, movies, or any other art form you want to mention. But I'm wondering, like, what kind of inspires your storytelling in the media that you consume?
Well, I'll start by saying that the reason that the writing shines in my games, especially my more recent games, is because I have a very good editor. And I would be remiss to not promote the idea of game editing, because I think it is a very important thing to do. And I think it makes games better. I think a lot of times people, especially solo developers like myself, and I'm guilty of having had this thought. First of all, you think, oh my God, it's going to cost me so much, when that's not necessarily the case. And two, you think, oh my God, if somebody comes in and touches my work, it's not going to be mine anymore. And that's 100% false. An editor's job is to make your game better, while still preserving your own voice. So yeah. As far as inspirations and influences and stuff, it's kind of a mishmash of everything. I mean, I can cite obviously, the language of point and click adventure games comes from having played the classics.
Mm-hmm.
Lamplight City, for example, the aesthetic of that game, I make no bones about the fact that I lifted it from the first Gabriel Knight game, because that is just a game that I think looks really cool, and I wanted to have that evoke that same atmosphere with it. But for Rosewater, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of westerns necessarily. I'm more into like the more modern neo westerns, like There Will Be Blood or No Country for Old Men.
Yeah.
But I guess it's really just the atmosphere that I want to recreate, that I'm influenced by. As far as stuff like the stuff I like to experiment with, especially like the branching paths and stuff. Games like Conquest of the Longbow were pretty inspirational, as far as the you have choices you have to make, and there's stuff going on behind the scenes that affects the outcome that you're not necessarily made aware of. Um, but yeah, even movies like Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. There was one scene
Yeah.
in that movie that I was like, "Oh, this is great! I would love to have something like this." I'm talking about the scene where like Sam Rockwell's character goes up to the newspaper office and just throws the guy out the window, and he rolls down the front of the thing and just plops on the ground. I was like, "Oh," and that's what inspired the defenestration scene at the beginning of Rosewater.
Yeah, I see
Um,
it.
yeah, so I remember after seeing that, I immediately storyboarded on a piece of paper, just like, oh, hey, here's this. Um, but yeah, I and this, yeah, I so like I mentioned, I was at Narrowscope, and Meredith Gran, who just released Perfect Tides Station to Station earlier this year and made Perfect Tides a couple of years ago,
Yeah,
who's
incredible.
also great, and you should have her on your podcast if you haven't already.
Oh, I would
Um,
love it. Yeah, I should
yeah,
reach out to her. I see
you
her as
should.
like a, I don't know. I read her blog and I've looked up to her for a bit, so that would be really cool.
She's really awesome. You should
Yeah,
definitely talk to her. But
sweet. I'll reach out.
she was asked uh, she gave the keynote on Saturday, and she was asked about her influences, and she gave an answer which I thought was brilliant, and I'm going to completely steal as well, which is, I could talk about my influences in more detail and say, I did this because this and this, but I prefer to just kind of step away and make my own work speak for itself. And if people
Yeah.
want to see influences there, they're free to. But I would much rather have my work stand on its own and just, have people appreciate it for what it is.
Hmm. That's beautiful. Yeah, and I think that like, I mean, it does represent, I think, what I love about games made by one or a few people is that like that vision and that kind of like amalgamation of all that we take in
Yeah.
comes through most clearly and is like most visible, and is, even though you're having editors and folks who are making your game better, like you said, it is still kind of that. I think it's the closest we can get to like communicating through the
Hmm.
medium, is like me playing Rosewater and seeing like inside your brain in a way, not
Yeah,
not
yeah, yeah.
entirely, but in a way.
Oh
um
no, for sure. I mean,
yeah.
yeah, you as a developer, especially for in cases like myself, and where I'm doing not just the writing but also the visuals as well. Like I'll put in little things, in jokes for myself, or just stuff. And like, yeah, it's very much, I feel like if you've played my games, you probably have a pretty good idea of what kind of person I am. For better or for worse, I guess. I don't know, but I mean, just as a little quick thing too, as an addendum, like I also feel like it's important to kind of, especially in the adventure game genre, um, I feel like it's important to kind of step back and say, yeah, I want my work to speak for itself, because, and I don't want to sound like a grouchy old man, even though I am, but I feel like in the adventure genre especially, there is still a lot of nostalgia,
Hmm.
and I am of the opinion that the adventure genre, especially the modern adventure genre, still has a lot of potential to be used as a medium where you can tell meaningful stories. I mean, there's nothing wrong with making a traditional comedic point and click adventure game. There's plenty of space for that. But I also feel like the genre is a perfect place to tell maybe more serious stories. I'm not saying like, oh my gosh, it has to be really dark and depressing or whatever. But
Yeah.
you can tell stories that aren't just, oh, here's a funny game about using bananas on screwdrivers to open doors, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like if when any like it's going to happen anyway. If you post a screenshot, someone's going to say, "Oh, that reminds me of Monkey Island. Oh, that reminds me of Broken Sword." Okay, that's fine. But I'm not going to say, "Yes, I was in." Like, one of the things that I feel is like the worst possible way you could market your game is by saying, "Here's my point and click adventure game. It's inspired by Monkey Island." Because that's saying I'm making a game where my main goal is to remind you of a game from 40 years ago that you probably like better, and
Yeah.
please give mine a chance because I have to remind you of another game instead of letting you appreciate my work on its own merits.
Yeah.
And it's especially, when people purposely put in references and stuff, that's a pet peeve of mine because it's like,
Yeah.
okay, but anyway, soapbox done. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think that it's more important to just say, yeah, this is my game, than yes, I was influenced by X, because then people will just think, oh, okay, this is just a fan game of this, and they won't take your game seriously necessarily.
Yeah, super important to hear. And I think like one of the things that comes to mind when you talk about adventure games telling their own stories and telling, in air quotes, more serious stories, is I had Dave Lloyd, creator of The Drifter, on the show
Yes.
just a little while back. And what he mentioned really taking an interest in adventure games, he said it mainly stemmed from like him being able to be like a director, like
Mm-hmm.
having the characters, walk, in a certain way on stage and how they talk to each other, and, figure things out through that visual representation. And I think like hearing even just within these 30 minutes, the connective tissue that we can draw between creators in the genre and between, you as a creator and these obviously very important community events that you've gone to, and, even in your early days talking about like getting people from the AGS community to voice characters and having these ideas that were essentially, in jokes as you describe them. I would love to hear more about like the value of community in the adventure game space, because it's something that I find extremely remarkable with adventure games in particular, whether it's Adventure Game Studio, that community, or
Mm-hmm.
just players, following creators, or creators, interacting with other creators. It seems like there is a lot of connective tissue there that is unique for games
Yeah.
these days, but also really endearing to me. So I'd love to hear more about your experience with that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, Adventure Game Studio in particular, I've always said that the reason I think it's still going today is partly because of what a strong community it's always had.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first picked it up in the early 2000s, there was already a pretty vibrant community. Like, there was an IRC channel, there was people around all the time to ask questions. There was always an active forum. Anytime you needed to ask any technical questions, you could go and ask either on IRC or in the forums, and you'd get an answer straight away. There's a critics lounge where you could put your artwork and get critique on it, which was also very valuable because there was a lot of really great artists in the community. And yeah, I think probably the most unique thing community wise that came out of Adventure Games Studio specifically was what I mentioned before, was Mittens, which was the yearly gathering. And like, I was very lucky. I got to go to a whole bunch of them. And not only did I get to meet all of these people and hang out and make these great friends, but I also got to travel all over the world, essentially. Like, the first one in 2004, which the first one was in 2002. I wasn't able to go to the first two because I was in college and I was broke. But because the first one, I believe, the first one was in the UK at a campsite, and the second one was in Sweden. Cool. The third one, which was the first one I went to in 2004, was in upstate New York. And so I was able to go to that one. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's where I met everybody. And like, that was really cool. And then the following year was in Greece, which was really exciting. Yeah. And that was a big influence on like the sixth Ben Jordan game, that was essentially just like a travel log of my time in Greece, minus the paranormal stuff. But yeah, it was like I went to Spain, to France, to Italy. Like, I didn't go to the one in Australia, which was one of the last ones, but I had already been to Australia a couple of times before that. But like, yeah, we had one in New Orleans, which was a lot of fun. In Boston, I hosted one in South Florida in 2009. That was really cool. So yeah, it was great, and like I still keep in touch with most of the people that are still around. Like I just mentioned, like I saw my friend from upstate who hosted the 2004 one. I just hung out with him this past weekend. And yeah, I think also beyond Adventure Game Studio, just like creators at large, just like it's always really cool seeing them at conferences like at GDC or at Adventure X or Narrascope or any other ones, like, I can't think of any specific ones. I guess the Adventure Game Fanfare, which happened a couple of years ago as well. But yeah, it's cool because, I mean, we're all doing the same thing, and it's really cool because there's no sense of competition. It's all just kind of like we're all in this club of dorks who make adventure games still. And we just really enjoy it, and it's fun to talk about and stuff. So yeah, it's really cool. And it's nice to know, especially considering that when I was growing up playing these games, like I said, I didn't really know anyone who played them. So I always felt like this sort of weirdo who had these games that no one had heard about. And then all of a sudden, when I started dipping my toe into making them, I found this community of people who not only had heard of the games, but like me, also wanted to make them. So that was really cool and validating.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I was a songwriting kid in high school, and like no one else in my early high school was. So I was like playing ukulele and guitar and like writing down lyrics. And I got to go to songwriting camp one summer, and was like kids from all over the country who also wrote songs were there, and it was just validating, like you said, is the right word, as far as wow, there's folks out there who
I found
do the same thing. Yeah, exactly. And I guess, like, you mentioned storyboarding earlier in the interview. One of the things that I think about when I'm playing your games is, does Francisco go from like puzzle to puzzle and fills in the story in between? Or when a game idea comes to you, do you have an idea of kind of the overarching story and then fill the puzzles in at different beats? How does the design process go for you today? And has that changed over time?
Oh, yeah. So you've asked me this question at the perfect time, because I am right now like getting to the end of the design phase on my current project. Because cool. Yeah, usually if I get interviewed and it's been a while since I did it, I'm like, I don't know, I forgot. It's one of those weird things where when you're working on it, you know what's going on, and then afterwards it just kind of exits your brain as to like how you did things, because you're focused on the actual production of stuff. But yeah, I mean, when I first started, when I was doing the Ben Jordan games and stuff, I would just kind of make it up as I went along, because my only real point of reference was I played adventure games. I know how they are structured. I know how they work. I'm just gonna do it, right? So I would figure out, the story, and then I would put in some puzzles, and then I would write all the dialogue on the fly in Adventure Game Studio and stuff. But yeah, as I've grown and gotten more experience, I've definitely do a full design document first. The temptation to always start working on the game and building it is always there, and I never quite have the restraint to just not start working on the game until I've completed everything.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I won't seriously start building the game until I have a design document. And so, yeah, my usual process is for Lamplight City and Rosewater, since it's an alt history setting. With Lamplight City especially, I started off with like the world Bible, and I kind of just wrote about like the setting and all sorts of things to just kind of establish my setting first. And Lamplight City, because it's a detective game, it was a little different because it was like, okay, well, let me think of the overarching story as far as like the main character, Miles Fordham, and his arc and his personal story throughout the course of the game. Like I came up with the basic concept for that first, but then I was, since it was, like I said, it's a detective game, then I had to think of like the individual cases and what each of those stories were and what the potential outcomes were and like the red herrings and all of that stuff. So I did do a bunch of flow charts and stuff on paper to kind of map out the way to get through each case. And I was still in the I'm going to build this as I go phase at that point. So even though I had it all on paper, I built it and I wrote it in Engine. And then after a while, my partner was like, "I can script edit this if you want." I was like, "Oh, okay, sure." So so I had to actually export all of the game text so that to put it into an external document so that she could edit it, and then I had to re-import it back into the game. So I was like, all right, I'm not doing this again. I'm not writing any dialogue until I'm going to write it in a script. It's going to get edited, and then I'm going to put it in the game. So that's what I did with Rosewater. And Rosewater also it didn't require as much world building because I already had what I had from Lamplight City. But of course, I had to come up with, the specific setting for that game. But then also, since the focus of that one was the characters and the relationships and stuff and the branching there, I also had to do a flow chart. And in addition to that, figure out like the choice points and how it would affect the relationships with the companions and so on and so forth. And with my current game, I've been doing the design document, but it's been interesting because story has taken. I've started out with the story, but then the puzzles also go in, and the puzzle design has been interesting because with Lamplight City and Rosewater, those games were a lot more focused on the branching narrative, and the puzzles. There were some puzzles, but they weren't that complicated. With this game, I'm kind of going back to the idea of multiple puzzle chains, more complex puzzle chains. So figuring those out and striking that balance of complexity versus difficulty and obtuseness and not making it too obtuse has been really interesting. But yeah, basically the flow has been, so the current game is divided into chapters, as most of my games are. But this one I wanted to specifically say, okay, I'm going to design chapter by chapter, so then that way I feel the sense of progression. So basically what I did was I wrote out a brief outline of what happens story-wise in each chapter, what needs to happen story-wise, what happens, where we start and where we end. And then I came up with like, okay, these are the puzzles, these are the obstacles that need to happen. So like, just as an example, we'll say, okay, the chapter starts and you decide that you need to go to the supermarket and buy some eggs. And you also need to get your car fixed. And then you also decide that you need to get a birthday present for your mom. Right. So then I was like, okay, goal 1, get eggs. Goal 2, fix car. Goal 3, get birthday present. And then I would go in and be like, okay, so, in each individual goal, the sub puzzles and like what else has to happen there, and then what else happens in the story, and etc. And then I for the first time I've been designing puzzle charts, which I guess I had sort of done with the flow charts in Lamplight City. These aren't strictly what people call puzzle dependency charts, but they are just like a visual flow chart for just the sequence of puzzles and how they relate to each other. And I've actually been using that in building, like, it's an easier tool for me visually to build the game, because that way I can see, oh, okay, I have to do this, and then I change the color on the on the cell. It makes it a lot easier than like looking at the design document and being like, oh, okay, this is the puzzle written out. It's just somehow for my brain more satisfying to check it off the flow chart than just be like, okay, I'll cross it off this written text.
Right.
I think that was the scope of the question, right?
Yeah. That was a great answer. And building on that, as I was researching for this episode, I looked through some of kind of the conversations that you've had as far as like criticism for Rosewater and like talking to fans and taking feedback. One of the things I found remarkable was kind of your generosity, and like you've obviously been doing this a while and like interfacing with folks who enjoy your games and don't enjoy your games, and you saying multiple times just like on Reddit or wherever I was looking, like, you know, it has nothing to do with me whether you like or dislike my game. I don't take it personally, like, thanks for playing, basically. And I found that, like, I just think a very like self-confident and like beautiful perspective as a, you know, game designer, because, you know, it indicates you having a, you know, tough skin or however you want to phrase it, but it also indicates like, you know, an understanding of humanity in that, like, no one person, you know, one person isn't going to design a game that everyone likes.
Oh, of course.
But where I'm going with this is basically like, how much do you find yourself, because you mentioned for this upcoming game, you're thinking about making puzzles more complex. And one of the things I saw you interfacing with folks who had played the game about was like the puzzles being, you know, maybe more simple than they would anticipate for Rosewater, and you being like, that's kind of what I enjoy. And so I was wondering, how much does like fan feedback come into your process, or feedback in general? Do you mainly just follow your instincts as far as what you want to do next, or do you find yourself kind of iterating based on the feedback that you get?
Yeah. So as far as what I'm going to do next, that's all me. I don't particularly think about like, oh, I need to make a sequel to one of my games because that's what's popular. I just make what I want to make because I know that I'm going to be making it for a while. So I have to do something that I know I'm going to enjoy. I still, to this day, am baffled in a good way at the fact that in the 6 years I was working on Rosewater, I never hated it. Like, I always would, I loaded up and played and tested the first part of that game, I don't know how many times. And yet every time I did, I still enjoyed doing it. And I don't know what that says, but I'm glad I didn't hate it. But yeah, I mean, I listen to feedback. Some feedback I know I shouldn't take too personally, but I still sometimes do.
Yeah.
I have developed a thick skin because I feel like as any creative, you have to, because like you say, there's never going to be something that you do that everyone's going to love.
Yeah.
The only time I ever actively respond to reviews on Steam as like a developer is when someone posts in their review something that's clearly not true. Like, for example, with Lamplight City, there are people, despite the fact that in the marketing and everything I've said many times that it's impossible to get stuck and that even if you get things wrong, you can still proceed with the story. If someone in their review is like, oh, this game has dead ends, and if you hit a dead end, you have to restart. Like, I'll be like, actually, no, that's not true. That's not how the game is designed. You know, maybe, and even like sometimes I'll be like, you know, well, where did you get stuck? Let me know. And then sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, and we'll engage, and I can guide them. And other times they just don't say anything, and that's fine too. Or like, you know, It's basically, yeah, if it's like someone wrote a review of Rosewater that was like, oh, this game punishes you for a choice. If you made a bad choice at the beginning, like you can't finish the game. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. But yeah, I mean, it's funny too. I keep going back to Narrowscope. I was chatting with Josh Mandel, who was one of the designers at Sierra, um, and we were talking about reviews, and I was like, I don't read your reviews too much, because the first 5 or so reviews you'll pretty much get a general idea of what worked and what didn't work in the game, and you can take that as a learning experience for next time. But if you just focus on every single review, there's always going to be like some other nitpick, and then you're going to be like, oh my god, how did I not see that? Oh no,
Yeah.
I'm terrible. And that's just, it's it can be hard. Like, I appreciate what you said about me, and like feeling like, thinking that that it's beautiful, and that I understand humanity or whatever. But like, I mean, I'll be the first to admit, I'm still the guy who, like, I read 50 positive reviews, and I'm like, yeah, okay, fine. And then I read one bad one, and I'm like, yes, they're absolutely right, I'm trash. But I mean, at the same time, more recently, I've been trying to not let that sort of thing get to me, and realize that, like, yeah, I'm putting my game out there. Like, it's still, uh, not shocks, but it's still like, I still can't wrap my head around the idea that people are actually playing my games. And
Yeah.
like, I'll go someplace, and I still have the experience where, like, a complete stranger at a conference or something will come up to me and be like, oh, I played your game, I loved it. And that's really cool. And I'm aware that, like, all the reviews and stuff, like, everyone out there is on the internet, but the likelihood of me meeting any of these people is very slim. So,
Right.
and this is, forgive me if this sounds sociopathic, but I have to disassociate. Like, I have to sometimes think, okay, look, I can't get too into my head about this, because essentially what this is just text on a screen. And yeah, it's might be saying some mean things about my game, but if I let just text on a screen affect my day, and like put me in a bad mood, so that the actual people around me that I care about are affected by me being in a bad mood, that's terrible. Like, no. And like, I go out on the street, and I walk down the street, and I'm like, nobody knows who I am. That doesn't matter. None of these people have played my game. Maybe they have. I don't know. But like, you can't live your life just being like, oh my god, they didn't like my game. Because if it's your livelihood, okay, maybe, if your game is a horrible disaster and it doesn't sell, that sucks. But like, as far as and it's, it's nice to get that validation as a creator, but to constantly be seeking it, and just depending on people on the internet's opinions, that way lies madness. And I don't recommend it. And again, speaking as someone who has let himself maybe veer too far into that direction, I think that it's healthy, both mentally and, well, mostly mentally, but just in general, to just take a step back and be like, okay, people will give you feedback, and some of it is going to be useful. As an example, like, stuff like, oh, quality of life stuff, or just like, why, I would love it if the game could preserve the volume when you save. Like, if I quit out, why do I, and I reload a save, like, accessibility stuff. But as far as just like, you know even though, yeah, like, the reason that I'm trying to make the puzzles in my current project more complicated or whatever isn't because everyone complained, or a lot of people complained, that they were too easy in Rosewater. And Lamplight City. It's because I like to challenge myself, and I like to do different things with each project. And I feel like with Lamplight City and Rosewater, I've done the branching narrative thing. Like, I've done what I want to do with that. I want to try something else. And for me, that something else is going back to the more traditional game design, but also putting my own spin on it, because I want to do a traditional adventure game, but I also want to do it in the way that I feel like modernizing the genre, like I've been doing, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, it also comes back to this idea that you talked about with the Meredith Grand talk, and the idea of like having what is on the screen created by an independent developer, like showing their, inside their mind, or however you want to phrase it. Like, the more you take in these outside perspectives, I think the more that can potentially muddy those waters. And I think, like, as creatives, we already give ourselves like so much resistance, and probably the overactive imagination, as you've described, like can already give you a lot of reasons why to like not do something, or why something is bad. And so that's why it is so important, I think, to preserve those ideas that excite you and engage the mind. And I'm so glad that you're continuing to do that, because I think it's creating some really unique and vibrant work.
Thanks.
Yeah, and speaking of vibrance, one of the things that stood out to me about Rosewater that was kind of like an added benefit to just my Steam search and playing it, was that you rotoscoped your animations. And one of the kind of games that really made me love the adventure game genre is The Last Express by Jordan Mechner, which I played my dad found it randomly on his iPad, and we played it together growing up. But that has rotoscoped animations, and it lends such a unique look and feel to your modern entries. And I think it also distinguishes them pretty clearly from, just this morning, I booted up the last Ben Jordan case, and seeing like the change in visual design, not even from talking about like going from a hobbyist to a professional designer, but just the choices being made. I guess I'm interested in like the progression of your aesthetic sensibilities in creating games, and why you decided in particular to adopt rotoscoping as a technique for Rosewater.
Well, the reason I do rotoscoping is because I can't animate. So, but actually it's funny, because I didn't start rotoscoping with Rosewater. I actually started rotoscoping with Ben Jordan Case 4. So I've been doing it I've been doing it for a very long time, but the technology has changed, and the results have changed, and I've gotten it's not just that, but I've gotten better at it. So I originally started it with Ben Jordan 4. I had a digital camera. It was like a cheap digital camera. It didn't even have the capability of video. So for animations, like for walk cycles, I would have to take individual pictures of myself in various states of walk cycle. Like I would have to awkwardly pose. So like estimating how it looked. And at the time, like the Photoshop version I was using didn't even have the animation window. So I had to kind of eyeball frame by frame. And as I kept going, and obviously the Ben Jordan games were like 320 by 200, so it was a lot lower resolution. So as I kept doing it, I got better digital cameras. Finally, I got a smartphone, which actually let me take video. So that was a big improvement, because then I could just actually export proper frames. I got a better version of Photoshop, even though I still use Photoshop CS2, but it has like the little animation window that you can actually preview your animations and put together your animations as like the raw footage before you even start tracing over it. So yeah, that little by little, I kept getting more experience with that. And then, because I rotoscoped the Golden Wake. I didn't do the art on Shardlight, but for Lamplight City, so a Golden Wake was 320 by 200. Lamplight City, I went higher resolution. It was 640 by 400. So I started doing. That was obviously an interesting experiment. And then there was one scene in Lamplight City where there's a first-person view of like you're looking into a sewer grate, and the character sticks his arm in and pulls out a gun. And I thought, how cool would it be if I just did like, if I rotoscoped my hand pulling out the gun just to get that
Mm.
much more of a cool cinematic look.
Yeah.
And I did. I like pointed the camera over my kitchen sink, and I put a can opener inside. I filled it with water. I put a can opener at the bottom to simulate the gun, and I did the movement, and I did that full screen animation. And I was like, okay, that's cool. And then when I did Rosewater and I bumped up the resolution to 720p, I
Mm.
started off by doing some tests to see if I could still rotoscope and like how many more frames I would need to not have it look weird at that higher resolution. And then once I figured out my workflow, then I thought, what would be cool is if I could do more cinematic full screen close up animations.
Mm-hmm.
And that was inspired by that one scene I did. And then I was like, okay, yeah, let's do that. So then that's why I had little intercut close up things to make it feel more cinematic.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as why I do it, it's like I said, it's because I can't really animate traditionally, and I've been doing it for so long that it's not just, oh, I do this because I can't animate. It's given me the opportunity to get creative and figure out how to solve problems. Like, I mentioned before the scene where the guy gets thrown out the window in
Mm-hmm.
Rosewater. Like that's two things. There's a close up of him flying out the window, and then there's the animation of him actually rolling down the awning and falling. And so for the close up, I was like, how am I going to do this? Because I've done my own stunts for other things, but I'm not a young man anymore. I have to be aware of my body's limitations now that I'm in my 40s. And I'm like, I can't jump out a window. I can't roll down a ramp. What am I going to do? So I actually went on YouTube and I found a video of like people rolling down a hill in the UK for this thing that they do that's like chasing cheese down a
Oh
hill.
yeah.
Yeah, so I got one guy and I was like, okay, I'll use this. And so I used that as my footage. And then for the close up there was like a behind the scenes music video thing that I found of a guy jumping out a window. I was like, okay, I'll use that too. So yeah, and things like riding the horse, like I had to make a horse out of a
Mm.
bench and like so I could sit on it with the proper like leg dangle. Um so yeah, it's been really interesting to kind of refine that process.
Yeah, that is fascinating to hear. I think particularly because it's like we're in an era where I hear this a lot on this show where, when I ask game devs about like any advice for aspiring, people who want to make games or whatever, they're like, it's never been easier. And for that reason, I think a lot of people feel paralysis or not
Mm,
sure where to start. And I
mm,
think we are in that era, right? Of like, there's so many more tools. It's never been more accessible, but we're also in an era that I think it's so cool to me to hear how like you can just do all this stuff at home and you can
mm.
just like make it work. And I think
Yeah,
that like DIY spirit is often lost in what a lot of people perceive to be these, tools that are accessible but very complicated. And like when you open them up, for instance, whether it's like Blender or Unity or Godot, even, an open source engine, you're kind of overwhelmed by just the amount of stuff that's there. And I think
right.
it's so cool to bring it back, this idea of someone like you who's making games commercially, like building their own props and like having to think about if they're going to jump out of their own, window or what have you. It's like, it's both endearing, I think, and imaginatively inspiring to folks who maybe aren't sure where to start and think about it from like a tangibility perspective.
Mm.
That's so cool to hear. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, of course. One other thing that
Yeah,
I wanted to mention was that like halfway through Rosewater, well, yeah, about halfway through Rosewater, because of course Rosewater, as I mentioned before, took 6 years. It's the longest project I've ever worked on.
yeah,
But for all of like I mentioned about like the walking, having to take the individual pictures, but then once I got video, it was a little easier. But what I would do was I would just video myself or whoever walking either towards the camera or away from the camera or sideways or whatever. But that always was still a little janky because obviously if you're going towards or away from camera, you're changing size. So I would have to, when I would export it, I would have to crop it and I would have to make sure that the dimensions were more or less the same. And it worked, but it was never great. And same thing with like the sidewalk, because even if you're walking from right to left or left to right or whatever, you still kind of slightly turn at an angle ever so slightly. So when I would get to like the last frame and it would loop back to the first one, there was sometimes this little jump between like the torso being turned ever so slightly, and I would always have to account for that. But then I got a treadmill, and that was like the best investment I've ever made. Like, I don't use the treadmill for exercise. I use it purely for rotoscoping, but it's just like a little cheap, like $200 walk pad that I got. And I got it in the middle of Rosewater. I'm like, not only does this save me the time of like having to crop everything for the walk cycles, but now I can get even more creative, because since I don't have to worry about the positioning, now I can do like funnier walks or like in more distinct walks. So like this character can walk with like a limp, or this character can walk with their chest out, or this one can walk slumped over, stuff like that. So yeah, it's always funny, the little improvements that you keep making from project to project, or at least that I try to keep making. And now I'm like, so this current project, this is the first project I'm going to do where I have the treadmill from the beginning. So it's like, okay, great. Now I know all the walk cycles in this game are going to be good. But who knows what I'll discover halfway through, where I'm like, oh man, I wish I'd had that at the start of the project. But
well, that's probably the most fascinating, in air quotes, technological advancement I've heard in a game developer's process to date. So,
great.
as we wrap up here, I've had you for over an hour. I really appreciate you being generous with your time. Before we get into kind of more of the stock recommendation, advice-based questions, I'm interested kind of in picking your brain as someone who's been obviously working in this particular genre for a while now. As a storytelling device, I'm always fascinated by the idea of like a mystery and why it kind of like captivates the human brain. It seems like it's like one of the most well trodden kind of like genre elements, I think, but it's still used so often and still so popular. And as a kind of near requirement of an adventure game, like investigating mysteries or solving puzzles or kind of peeling back the curtain. I'm wondering, like, why do you think, and you might not have a good answer, that's okay, but I'm fascinated in, like, why do you think mystery stories are so interesting to us as people and are kind of core to our experience with media?
I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but I feel like personally, I'm very nosy. I like knowing about things. I think mysteries appeal to that aspect of us as humans, just wanting to know stuff that maybe is like intriguing or interesting or exciting. I think it just basically boils down to that, because some people have patience. Some people, you tell them, oh, I have a secret, but I can't tell you. And they'll be like, okay. Other people are like, no, tell me now. Tell me right now. I'm one of those other people.
Yeah.
Those latter people. And I think that's why mystery is so enticing to people, because it's like, oh man, if I find out this knowledge, I'm going to know something. Right. And I'm going to have this secret that maybe not everyone else will, or something like that. And I think the reason that it lends itself so well to the adventure genre in particular is because, solving puzzles and investigating things is kind of the core elements of adventure games. So making a mystery in an adventure is very easy. Making an intriguing adventure game that's not a mystery, that's the challenge.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And that's, I think, something, going back to Meredith Grand, that like
Yeah.
she writes very eloquently about and talks about, and obviously you can see it in her games where it's like using the genre to express different kinds of stories. But
Yeah, and
yeah.
that's what I appreciate about her games. She's doing what I have been crowing about for years now, which is, use the adventure genre to make a story that's not just a comedy or a mystery for that matter. Like there's no mystery in Perfect Tides, but it's
Yeah.
still a compelling game. And
Right.
yeah, there's no complicated puzzles. It's still an emotionally affecting interesting game with interesting characters and interesting experiences. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the answer though as being, simple in a way, and talking about mysteries where using that kind of operative word like exciting. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what is so fascinating about, detective media or just mystery stories or adventure games, where it's like it's exciting to pursue knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I think that is beautiful. And speaking of adventure games, a great transition. In general, I was just wondering if you could recommend some of the games that you think my listeners should play, whether they're retro, maybe some more recent entries in the genre. What are some games that you would recommend?
Well, I always kind of flinch when I get asked this because I don't really play adventure games very much anymore because I make them all day. So the last thing I want
Yeah.
to do is play them. But I have already mentioned Perfect Tides and the sequel Station to Station. I think those are really good. I haven't yet played The Drifter, but
Hmm.
I'm sure Dave will kill me for not having done so yet. No, he's really nice.
He is.
But from what I've heard, it's really good. So I would say that's another one to check out.
Yeah.
The Excavation of Hobbs Barrow that came out a couple of years ago, I really
Yeah.
enjoyed that one. That's a lot more of just like a folk horror mystery. Again,
Hmm.
that's a really good one if you're interested in like uncovering the mystery of like a rural British town.
Yeah.
Um, I've gotten really into like the deduction games, like
Yeah.
Golden Idol. I've only played Case of the Golden Idol, but I haven't played Rise. But I really like the Root Trees Are
Same.
Dead.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I had a lot of fun with that. Obviously, Return of the Obra Dinn was kind of the one that kind of opened the door for that again. Um, yeah. As far as like classic ones, I would say it's hard to recommend the classic ones to someone who has never played an adventure game before because some of them are a little more on the obtuse side. Um, and I will use this as a moment to address a point in one of the questions that you had written down that I was like, yes, I get to scream about this.
Oh, please do. Yeah.
Which is that I think a lot of the reason that people that the genre is kind of maligned for moon logic and things like that is because adventure games didn't really do a great job of communicating back in the day.
Mm.
Some of them did, and modern ones generally do. Some still don't. But I feel like the thing that makes an adventure game, quote unquote, hard or difficult is just the fact that it doesn't tell you what you're supposed to be doing and doesn't give you the proper feedback for what you should be
Yeah.
doing. So while I would say, I love the first Gabriel Knight game, that game is good, but it does have some puzzles that don't really give you much of an idea of what you should be doing, and so
Mm.
you know they I don't say they spoil the experience, but definitely be on the lookout for those. Conquest of
Yeah.
the Longbow that I mentioned earlier being another one where it does give you a pretty good idea of what to do, but it also is like copy protection the game because it integrates it in an interesting way because it'll be like, oh, identify these gemstones or solve the riddle of the green man or learn the druid code. But in order to know those things, you have to look in the manual. So that's
Yeah.
it creates a little friction.
Mm.
Um, but I mean, I recently did a series where I replayed some of the classic adventure games to kind of study their puzzle design.
Mm.
And I played The Curse of Monkey Island, which I still think holds up very well. I played Day of the Tentacle, which I believe is a masterclass in puzzle design. and I played Leisure Suit Larry 7, which it's a game, but it's really well designed.
Yeah.
So I would recommend those from like the old canon, and
Cool.
yeah, the ones I said from the newer modern. Oh, Foolish Mortals is a fun one too. I
Oh, I've
I
never
have
heard of
to.
that one.
Oh, Foolish Mortals is a it's so if Monkey Island was inspired by Pirates of the Caribbean, Foolish Mortals was inspired by the Haunted Mansion.
Oh, cool.
It's a really fun, quirky comedy game. It's described as merry and macabre. It's set in 1930s Louisiana. You're a young insurance auditor turned treasure hunter who's looking for a lost fortune.
Love it.
Full disclosure, I did do the voice casting and directing for that game, so I am involved in it. But I had to play it as a to get an understanding of it, and I really
Yeah.
enjoyed it when I played it. So I'm not
Cool.
being paid to advertise it.
No, those are all great recs. And before or during or after this final question, feel free to, if there are any other questions you were excited to answer, but that I didn't get to, go for it. But I was
Okay.
just wondering if you could give some advice to an aspiring game maker, what would it be? You probably get this question all the time, but I'm particularly interested in your perspective on this since you've been making games for a while and you've kind of had this period that was, purely hobbyist and
Mm-hmm.
then, into a professional setting, and how you kind of find the joy day after day, and maybe related to the experience of like booting up Rosewater and still liking it, or at least not hating it for,
Right.
that long development cycle. And maybe there's multiple questions in there, maybe not, but I would love to hear it.
Sure. So it's tricky to give general advice because, as you and your listeners are probably aware, the games industry has been a dumpster fire for a while now.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was asked to go speak to a bunch of students at a university in Puerto Rico last May, and I basically told them, "You're going to graduate, and you're going to basically have a useless piece of paper. I'm sorry, but it's true."
Yeah.
And I felt really bad because I felt like I was discouraging them, but I was like, I'm being real. I'm being real here. And the person who had invited me was like, no, it's good. We're not here to sell them dreams. We have to let them have realistic expectations.
Yeah.
My advice for anyone who's an aspiring game developer is if you're trying to like work for a AA or AAA company, it's going to be very difficult.
Yeah.
I know not everyone has the means or the ability to be a solo indie developer. I've been very lucky in that regard. But I feel like the reason that I've been able to continue doing it for so long is one, because I've been doing it for a very long time. So I've been able to develop the skills that I need to keep my overhead low. The
Yeah.
reason it's like I was very lucky to be able to spend 6 years on Rosewater. I'm not ever going to be able to spend that long on a project again unless someone writes me a check for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Because it's just not sustainable.
Yeah.
The reality is there are so many games now on the market that getting noticed is very, very difficult. And getting people to not only notice your game, but continue to care about your game, and more importantly, continue to consistently spread the word and have people buy your game is another challenge. So if you want to get into this and make it your living, you have to figure out how to do it in such a way that your games are not going to take a super long time, not going to cost an enormous amount of money that will take forever to recoup, because obviously they have to be able to bring in enough income to allow you to continue working on the next game.
Yeah.
My analogy is a beaver building a dam. And the dam is each log in the dam is a game in your and the dam is your catalog. So you want to reinforce your career by building up your catalog as quickly as possible. And I say quickly, but I'm talking about not like in a month.
Yeah.
Take some time because you don't want to put out absolute trash. But the good effect is that if there's always people who have never heard of you or your games. So if they find your latest game and they realize that you've done other stuff, they'll go back and check out your previous stuff. And that's how you continue that long tail of sustainability. But yeah, as far as starting, I mean, the best way to do it is to start with a non super ambitious small project, whether it's a game jam or something, that's the way to do it. And now I have to now add something, which is just because of the world we live in. Please, for the love of God, do not use generative AI to make your game. I have seen so many recent adventure game projects that have used generative AI for either the backgrounds or the characters or the voiceover or all of them. And they look terrible. Like, you get one or two people who are like, oh, wow, this looks amazing. But if you want to do it seriously as your career, do not do that, because no one's going to buy your game. And, I mean, not to get into the whole thing with AI, but like, yeah, it really made me angry, because like one person was like, oh, look, I'm making an adventure game, and I've done all this, and they had their Twitter bio said something like, can't write, can't code, make game anyway. And I was like, when I started making games, I couldn't write, I couldn't draw, I couldn't code. But you know what I did? I learned how to write. I learned how to code. I learned how to draw. And I wasn't an expert overnight. You look at the Ben Jordan games, and they're ugly. Like, they don't look good. But people still downloaded them and still played them and still download them and still play them to this day. Because there's something in them that people like. I don't know what it is. I mean, I can't be pretentious and say, I mean, I'm not saying, oh, I don't understand why people like them. I'm saying, me as the creator, I'm too close to be able to pinpoint, yes, this is what people like about them. But I will say this. People love the third game in the series the most out of all of them. I consistently hear back from fans saying that their favorite one is the third game. And at this point, I have enough years behind me to be able to say that I can guarantee you the reason that people like that game the most is because that was the game that I had the most fun making. It was just this perfect storm of, it was summertime, I was in college, I was having a great time, I was genuinely enjoying making the game. I was really enjoying getting the music from my composer and putting it into the game. I was making it up as I went along, but I was also really having fun. And I think that fun and that passion comes out to the player when they're playing it. So what I'm saying is, when you're creating something and you put yourself and your soul into it, and people play it, even if it doesn't look great, or maybe if the writing is not the best, or, it's a little buggy, like, people will still enjoy it because that soul is there. And using artificial intelligence is not going to put that in there. It's going to feel stale and just bad. So there. There.
It comes full circle too to what we're talking about as far as like it being a human medium, and like seeing the, not only in one game, that perspective, but seeing the progression over the years, and seeing, like you're talking about, when they discover one game, looking back and finding the others is so endearing. And I think it's a great note to end on. Francisco, thank you so much. You've been extremely generous with your time, extremely generous with your games over the years. And I just want to say thanks for joining me on Indie Game Garden. It was an awesome conversation. I'm very grateful.
Well, again, thank you for having me, Johnny. It was great. This was a lot of fun. And yeah, I appreciate it.
Of course, yeah. And that was Francisco. As humble a soul as he is, he would, I'm sure, be squirming if he heard me describe him this way on air, but truly a legend, and I am really, really grateful to have gotten to talk to him and honored, and whenever I get to speak to someone like that on this show, it's always a kind of surreal experience just because it's still a very small pod, and I'm just blown away by the generosity of the guests we have on here. So thank you, Francisco, and thank you, listener, for joining and listening along. It's a thrill to do this podcast. It is always the highlight of my week whenever I get to record episodes. So I hope we can keep this going together. And if you do want to help keep it going, the best thing you can do is just tell one friend. I don't do anything to market the show, so I would really appreciate it if you just told one of your video game inclined friends or maybe creative friends about this show. I think it would be great to listen to on a walk, to listen to in the background while you're working, or what have you. So I appreciate you doing that. You can always reach me via email at IndieGameGarden if you have any suggestions or just to say hi. I'm also on Blue Sky at Darth Mulks if you want to do more informal chats there. And you can give me a rating on like Apple Podcasts or Spotify or something as well. I'd appreciate it. For my little spiel today, I kind of want to talk about just how cool these little like niche and hobbyist driven communities can be with games today. I think we're, especially folks who are more used to growing up with like the first party consoles and Steam games that are AAA in nature, they can just be so developed and polished to the point of being inaccessible. But as I was talking to Francisco about on the show, and as I've just experienced in my own life recently doing a little research, it's cool when like little communities and appreciative, supportive communities develop around like single creators or like engines. So Adventure Game Studio, as an example, there's like hundreds of freeware games made by folks in the Adventure Game Studio community that you can download for free on the Adventure Game Studio website and see not only just the boundless and wonderful creativity there is with folks making freeware games, but also just like the capabilities of the engine and unique takes on it. And I think it's a great way to, as Francisco and I talked about again, like be able to like feel a connection to something that is otherwise a solitary activity and feel how accessible it is to folks at any level, right? Because you can play commercial games that will give you inspiration, things to aspire to, but you can also play hobbyist games that show you, even though tons and tons of work go into those, maybe they look a little bit more homemade, or maybe they're a little bit smaller or what have you, and they allow folks to be able to, I think, see a path forward a lot more easily than, seeing the very polished game, for instance, like Francisco's Rosewater, and being like, I could never make something like that, which is kind of where I'm at right now. We're playing these like fan games, but my favorite one so far that I've played freeware on Adventure Game Studio is called Black Morph. It's a short game, super simple, elegant, and beautiful, beautifully illustrated, but small, right? And playing these types of games allows me to see like, yes, this would still be extremely difficult and time consuming, but there's a path forward there. So I would highly recommend like following a community and engaging in a community, whether it's surrounding an engine or surrounding your favorite Pokemon ROM hacker or surrounding your favorite indie creator, and just get involved in the Discord, share some of your art, share some of your ideas, and see what happens. And at the very least, just check out some of the cool stuff going on that is not getting really any press or media or attention from kind of the mainstream circles that we all kind of run in, whether it's on Discord, Blue Sky, what have you, because there's so much creativity out there. And while a lot of games will go unbought and never have commercial success or commercial identities at all, seeing the creativity that folks put together just for the fun of it is beautiful. And just like Francisco said in the interview, the Ben Jordan game that people love the most, episode 3, is the one he had the most fun with. And sharing that creativity, whether it's just through dialogue, like saying, hey, I loved your game, or telling a friend about the game, or through play, or through connecting with devs at conferences or online or what have you. That sharing is what really is core to this experience and the joy that we can all find in games. And that's the best way, I think, to break through internet apathy, as we have discussed on this show in the past. So my brain is alight with thought. I'll leave it there because I know it's been a longer episode today, but what a generous soul Francisco was. As I said at the end of the interview, generous with both his time today and his games over the years. So do support him, and I'll leave all the links to his games and such in the show notes as usual. And can't think of a better human to support there. So appreciate you all, and we'll talk next time. Bye.